All right, good afternoon. I'm Suzanne Spalding. I'm Senior Advisor here at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, where I lead the Defending Democratic Institutions project. In 2016, I was Undersecretary at the Department of Homeland Security, where I had the great honor of leading the men and women who work so hard every day to try to safeguard our critical infrastructure, to strengthen its security and its resilience. And in 2016, we were really focused on election infrastructure. I had the opportunity to see firsthand the tremendous work that is done by our state and local partners, by our federal partners, to protect our election infrastructure, particularly at the state and local level, by amazing public servants. The very public servants who today must not only be tireless, as they always have been, to get this work done that needs to be done for these elections, but today, unfortunately, must also be courageous. 1 in 6 election workers reported having been threatened in recent years. And the Department of Justice told us just this week that they're investigating dozens of reports of threats against election officials. Fortunately, as we've seen, they are finding some of these folks making the threats and prosecuting them. But in addition to these domestic threats, the most recent threat assessment from DHS warns, quote, "We expect the 2024 election cycle will be a key event for possible violence and foreign influence targeting our election infrastructure, processes, and personnel. Nation-state adversaries likely will continue to spread dis, and malinformation aimed at undermining trust in government institutions, our social cohesion, and democratic processes." The assessment goes on to talk about AI and cyber and other technologies that could be used by our adversaries, and concludes that Russia, China, and Iran continue to develop the most sophisticated malign influence campaigns online. Many of the tactics that these adversaries use to influence U.S. audiences will likely be used in the lead up to the 2024 election. DHS plays a vital role in safeguarding our elections against these potential threats, and we are so fortunate today to have with us Iranga Kahangama, who is the Assistant Secretary for Cyber, Infrastructure, Risk, and Resilience at the Office of Strategy, Policy, and Plans at the Department of Homeland Security. Prior to this position, he served at the White House in the National Security Council as Director for Cyber Incident Response. In that role, he was a principal author of Executive Order 14028, Improving the Nation's Cybersecurity. He also oversaw the federal government's response to a wide range of malicious cyber activity, including the Russia-attributed SolarWinds incident, China's exploitation of Microsoft Exchange servers, and ransomware attacks such as those on Colonial Pipeline, on JBS Foods, and Kaseya Software. Prior to joining the NSC, Iranga served as Senior Policy Advisor at the FBI, working on an array of cyber, internet, and technology policy issues. He earned a Master of Public Policy from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Iranga, it's great to have you here today. We're going to give Iranga an opportunity to make a few opening remarks, and then he and I are going to have a brief conversation, fireside chat, and then open it up with the moments that are left for questions.
Great. No, and thank you to Suzanne and CSIS for having me. It's great to be up here with a fellow DHS alum. It's always good to be in good company. And I wanted to thank you for giving us the opportunity to chat about this topic. In that vein, I think the department obviously takes election security, cybersecurity around the election infrastructure and all elements of it very seriously as a high priority. You mentioned you were looking at this issue from 2016. Our focus, going from 2016 to 2024 is only strengthened. It's only increased in our resolve. We've been we've learned from past elections, and we continue to monitor. And I want to really reassure you, your community, the public, the American public, that the security of our infrastructure and our election system remains strong. It's something that we have to learn and grow with the threats, but when you think about it, our approach to election security has always been evolving. We've always had to deal with new and creative threats and risks that come with our election. When you look at it in our recent past, we as a country and as a federal government adapted to dealing with elections in a COVID environment, right? An array of unique challenges that we've had to deal with. And that's on top of existing cybersecurity threats, on foreign influence threats. And so just in that vein, as we look forward and we think about new and upcoming threats and risks, whether that's artificial intelligence or other things that we're going to get into later today, I think we take that same mindset that we are clear-eyed in what we're seeing. We understand that new and evolving threats emerge, but at the same time, as a federal apparatus, we remain coordinated and in lockstep to try and address these issues. To your point, I think it's become even more clear to us as federal government employees that the stakeholders at the state and local level are really the key implementers of our election infrastructure. And as DHS, we want to be in as supportive a role of those state and local officials as much as possible. When you talk about elections, how people get their information, it's very much that they tend to be most comfortable with the organizations and agencies that touch them on a daily basis, which are state and local, right? Whether that's your local county, your local school board, your governor, and things like that. So part of our process has been really making sure that those folks are empowered and that those voices are raised. But we've learned a lot of lessons, and we continue to look at how we can further empower them, how we can provide them resources, how we can provide them information as we learn to do that. I think another general theme of the Biden administration writ large has been more rapid declassification, a more rapid sharing of information to better identify what those threats are, right? And I think that theme goes beyond elections. We saw it in the run-up to Russia's invasion of Ukraine with the White House rapidly declassifying evidence and intelligence that we have. So I think from an infrastructure organizational concept, we are better organized and better prepared to do things like that may be more tactical, but really helpful in making sure that those that can action that information, whether that's state and locals or other election officials, have that context. And we've done that by helping get security clearances for these individuals, by doing tabletop exercises and really making sure that we can better inform those that have direct interventions with the elections, have the threat information that they need. So in that sense, and zooming out a little bit, I think we feel very confident that going into this election season, we've learned a lot from our past elections. We're laser focused on existing threats as well as emerging ones and kind of the gamut of that. And I think we'll get into this as well, but we've also increased and improved our interagency coordination. I think the threat is only as big as the gaps we have in the federal apparatus, whether that's, today going all the way back to 9/11 and putting the pieces together of what's happening. We are in more constant communication with law enforcement partners, with our intelligence community partners, with our state and local conduits within our respective federal agencies. So really trying to spread the communications as well, I think it's significantly improved. So I lay that all out there to kind of give confidence that we know that the election will be a very big deal. It's something that is on our radar. We're meeting constantly to do it, but we recognize that there will be things that emerge that we've never seen before. We've seen that in the past. I remember being uniquely involved in a ballot paper shortage in 2022, right, as supply chains reduced the amount of paper available to print ballots. I never really thought about that aspect until they came across our desks. So, just like dealing with that, I think we're postured to take care of any issues that may arise, but obviously we will keep a vigilant eye out. But thank you for having me here today, and I look forward to chatting with you about this.
Excellent, great. Well, thank you for that overview. I think it is really important both to be candid about the potential threats, but also to be really informative about all of the good work that is going underway to address those threats. So As a threshold matter, I think a lot of folks are used to the role that CISA, my old organization, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, plays in helping to work with state and local election officials on the ground to safeguard our elections. You are not at CISA.
Correct.
You're from a different office. CISA is the operational component. You're from that headquarters office that deals with strategy, plans, and policy. So talk to us a little bit about how your role is different than what CISA is doing and how you guys work together and collaborate.
Sure. So, we're in lockstep. I talk to the CISA leadership team daily, if not hourly, on a range of these issues. CISA is our operational arm, right? They are the agency within the department that is on the ground meeting with state and local election security individuals. They are implementing guidance. They are conducting risk assessments. They are providing analysis and tools to state and locals around physical protection, cybersecurity protection. So really kind of doing the on-the-ground work. Where we sit at policy, I represent the Secretary's broader strategic outlook, coordinating our policy across multiple components. CISA is doing a majority of our work, but we also have other components that touch on election security. We have an intelligence office, intelligence and analysis. Secret Service obviously plays a role in security from the candidate perspective. And so I really coordinate that broad department strategy and then serve as the representative and liaison when we're talking about National Security Council policymaking and how we drive that coordinated effort with the interagency. When we talk about interagency partners, my office also helps drive some of the work we're doing with other parts of the intelligence community, participating in things like the notification framework and how we are identifying what to do with foreign influence campaigns that we see coming across. So, I think it's a very good relationship. It's one that I think is needed to coordinate multiple different, remnants that's occurring in the department and to make sure that the secretary and our leadership have the full picture. But it's been a great relationship.
So, given that division of responsibilities and your role in that broader cross-department perspective, we talked a little bit already about the threat assessment and the nature of the threats to elections. That threat assessment, I assume, came out of the Intelligence and Analysis Office. Talk to us a little bit more about the role that they are going to be playing in this run-up to the election, helping across the interagency and state and local election officials to understand what the intelligence community is seeing in terms of potential threats and how all of you are thinking about those in terms of what worries you the most.
Sure. So obviously a big part of this, as I mentioned, is going to be information sharing and making sure that we can kind of rapidly turn around the information that we see. Our INA shop is responsible for putting out, information, I think in particular at the unclassified or for official use only level. And so with that specific expertise, as well as their inroads with state and local law enforcement and fusion centers across the country, I think there's a lot of really good connectivity that INA has to push out that information. And they're going to be key. So we work with DNI and others to understand the threat. From the threat perspective, we see a range of threats. We've seen them in past elections, and we have no doubt that they're going to continue to want to prod and force our hands in future elections. From a foreign nation-state perspective, we continue to have concerns about Russia, China, Iran playing a role in foreign disinformation and foreign influence operations. I think with the sophistication of AI, which we can talk about a little bit more, we're going to see, maybe some more sophisticated, more precise attempts to phish and get access to campaigns and to election infrastructure. Maybe the English is a little bit better in those phishing campaigns, maybe a little bit more believable, which I think is a good transition to the fact that cyber security is going to be a continuing threat. I think that's something that we continue to see across the board with all of our critical infrastructure owners and operators. But cybersecurity is going to be really, really big. And that, that goes across threat actors. That goes from cyber criminals who may not even want to affect the election, who may be looking to ransomware state and local entities for their own profit, but then somehow state and local office realize that that's connected to an election office, right? And then all of a sudden you have information locked up, or you have hack and leak operations with voter registration rolls and things like that. Two nation states who want to scan, the intelligence community assessment that was recently put out regarding the 2022 election very bluntly noted that we see nation-state adversaries scanning election campaigns and scanning election infrastructure to get access, because cyber can be disruptive in and of itself, or it can be means to an end, and that means a means to obtaining information, to maybe leaking information or manipulating information so that it seems that people in campaigns or elections are doing things that frankly are not true. So we have those range of issues from a technical perspective. But I think to some of your earlier comments, I don't want to forget the physical threats, because I think that's a serious issue and something that the Secretary and the Department is deeply concerned about. We see increasing threats of violence against election workers, who are doing really hard work, some on a voluntary basis, because they really believe in our elections. And both them and voters on voting day all deserve to be safe. And they deserve to have the protections they needed, and they deserve to not be harassed afterwards. And those are all threats that we see coming. And so hardening infrastructure, hardening physical barriers and voting and polling locations will also be important from continued threats of violence to these workers. And then thirdly, I think we should think about the unexpected. Our threats are intentional, but the risks are also unintentional. And that can range from COVID, as I mentioned, to hurricane season in certain parts of the country during elections. That's something that's a little bit more tried and true. We're ready for the unexpected in that sense. But those will also be threats that are more specific to maybe election day or other specific types and parts of the country because of the unexpected. Things will happen, things that we can't predict, whether natural disasters or otherwise, but those operational risks also are something that keeps people up at night, but something that is a little bit more manageable from an emergency management perspective.
Yeah. And that range of threats that you talk about, right, gives everyone a sense of what is facing state and local election officials today. And they are experts at contingency planning. That is the nature of what they do. What if power goes out? Yeah. What if, as you say, what if we have a big hurricane, if a storm, or all of those kinds of things. They have been planning, and they've done that for decades, thinking all of those things through, including the threat of violence, right? And balancing the challenge with that threat of violence at the polling places is balancing the sense of security you want to give people without having an intimidating presence, for example, of law enforcement at the polling place. And again, that is an issue that is maybe heightened in this election, but is one that election officials have dealt with for a long time. But let's just focus on that for just a minute. What role can DHS and is DHS playing to help with that kind of planning and those relationships that are so critical with local law enforcement to make sure that you are all able to provide a secure environment without an intimidating presence?
Sure. No, I appreciate the question, and the nuance is important. I think up front I want to be clear that there's not really a role for the federal law enforcement presence at polling locations. I don't think that's in line with the law, frankly. But I do think there is a very strong supporting role, and that's something that we continue to do. So the department can play a couple of different roles. As I previously mentioned with our operational agency, CSIS, we can do risk assessments. We can help election officials understand some of the physical vulnerabilities or physical weaknesses of a given polling location or an office and provide hardening advice of how they maybe want to construct the organizational construct of the polling location or other offices. There's some limited funding opportunities as well from DHS grant programs, as well as other federal government grant programs where we can provide money so that they can obtain the equipment and the protections that they need. And then that threat assessment and that threat information sharing, helping state and local law enforcement understand if we are seeing a threat, if we are seeing some intelligence. We work hand in hand with agencies such as Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation to make sure that anything that is, a physical violent threat that is a violation of federal law is enforced, and that the law enforcement community can get after that in partnership with our state and local efforts. But I want to emphasize it's a supporting role, and I think that's the appropriate role for us to have, but one that we cherish with our state and local partners.
Yeah. You mentioned funding, and I know from talking to state and local election officials that is a huge issue for them.
Yep.
Right? They are, again, they're used to the sort of, standard, get all the work that needs to be done just to get elections up and running. But all of this wider array of threats and a heightened threat environment in our increasingly polarized society is an added burden for which they really need resources more than anything. Again, they've always been sensitive to not having too much federal involvement, right?
Very well,
It's sort of a sacred thing in our country that our elections are managed by our state and local election officials, not by the federal government. And yet, the federal government has the resources that state and local officials need. How do you want to make a pitch to Congress to provide more funding? How are you guys feeling about the amount of funding you're able to provide to state and local election officials? Because I know they'd like more.
I mean, we would love to give them more. I would always be happy to ask for more funding. I think that's going to be really key. We hear that from state and locals. I think we're doing the best with what we have. We have expanded some funding opportunities that are maybe ancillary or next to some of these efforts. So one thing I would want to hit, I think we did get over $1 billion in our state and local cybersecurity grant program from recent legislation. We've been implementing that. We're in year 2. So this concept is specifically for DHS. We have a pot of money where we can issue funding to state and local entities to improve the cybersecurity of state and local government institutions, which probably have a good amount of overlap with election offices and election infrastructure. That money is dispersed once a state gives a cybersecurity plan to CISA and to DHS. We certify the plan and then disperse the money. So we're in our second round of doing that, and so hopefully soon we'll get some interesting metrics about how that's being applied. But I think that is a creative and good use of new sources of money that state and locals could potentially consider for that. But yeah, for the Hill, I mean, we'll always take more money. I think we're not necessarily trending in that direction these days, but we'll take more money if we can get it.
Yeah. It's so critically important to preserving, sustaining, building public trust in the legitimacy of that process so that they will respect the legitimacy of the outcome, right? Yeah. And so cyber and disinformation are critical elements of that. You talked about the cybersecurity threats and just now the funding for cybersecurity, the relationship between that cybersecurity and election infrastructure, running from the, keeping voter registration databases to building the ballot, to loading the ballot, to election day, to tabulation, to transmitting all of that whole infrastructure, and indeed all the way to the wire services and reporting that night.
To certification, which can be weeks and months after the actual physical election.
Right. We all now understand the critical importance of that certification in January. But campaigns are also potential targets, and you mentioned campaigns. That, I remember that was, clearly that was a big issue in 2016. We had the hack and leak of emails from the DNC, but it was tricky for DHS to navigate that relationship with the political candidates as opposed to state and local election officials. How are you guys thinking about that today in terms of the kind of support or education or warning or whatever that you might be able to give to campaigns that might be targeted in a way that undermines our election?
Yeah, so I think we'll continue to put information out there. We do know, I think, as I mentioned in the recently published Intelligence Community Assessment of 2022, we specifically say that we see nation-state actors poking and prodding, scanning, specifically within political campaigns. That's going to be a ripe target. We know that. We're going to provide as much information to everyone as possible and make sure that those threats are done. I think there's a amount of cybersecurity that needs to be implemented. That is a lesson that we've learned. It is the lowest hanging fruit that can be exploited a lot of times. Known vulnerabilities, known things that aren't patched, lack of multi-factor authentication. These are really the blocking and tackling of cybersecurity that can really open us up to vulnerabilities. We're going to continue to push information out to everyone, make sure that those that need it have it, and that we are publicizing any and all threats that we have. I think we're well postured to continue that information. We're connected with the information and sharing and analysis centers that are working with various arrays of election officials, and we'll just have to be very vigilant to communicate that threat out.
And I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to the Defending Digital Campaigns organization on whose board I sit, which provides free cybersecurity services to campaigns in addition to training and education. A really important part of that whole election process.
Absolutely.
So you've mentioned the scanning, and in 2016, of course, we had we were very concerned about scanning the what was attributed to Russia, ultimately scanning of voter registration databases. And my conclusion about what that was all about is that it was really designed to be in a position to support information operations. It was because the information that's in those registration databases is not that sensitive. And so we thought, okay, well, what else could that be about? Well, if you went in and corrupted that data, of course, if you deleted names, if you changed the spelling, if you changed addresses, if you corrupted that data, and people show up then to vote on election day and they are turned away, they're told they're not there, you have long lines, you have chaos at the election, around the election, that undermines the public's confidence in the legitimacy of that election, and is a way, if you are a foreign adversary and you care about the outcome of that election, or simply weakening whoever is elected, to undermine the legitimacy of that election. I want to focus in a little bit more on the information operations, because I think we're in a really difficult environment for DHS to operate in that disinformation, around disinformation, because of the way that it has gotten so caught up in our politics. And we see what's happening in the EU. We're just seeing reports coming out this week about Czech government is putting out a report about Russian interference, attempts to interfere in the EU parliamentary elections coming up in June, primarily through this Voice of Europe propaganda outlet, but also other forms of foreign malign influence using influential voices, et cetera. If we think that Putin was interested in the outcome of the 2016 election, I think it is hard to deny that for Putin, the outcome of this 2024 election in the United States may be viewed as an existential issue for him, because of its potentially direct impact on support for Ukraine in that war. And one of the things, and so we, I believe we should really be expecting a full-on effort by Russia to influence the outcome of that campaign. In 2016, when we began to realize that Russia was behind information operations, we were, I think it's fair to say, one of the considerations for the administration was not wanting to appear to put a thumb on the scale, right, in that election. How are you guys thinking about that today? How are you anticipating seeing this kind of activity, assuming we do, and how you will be able to talk to the public about this activity in a way that seems that might be accepted as trustworthy.
Sure. So I think agree with your judgment that foreign influence is going to be an attractive thing for foreign governments to do to interfere in our elections. It's not something new. It's something we've seen in one form or another over many, many years. I think, to my earlier comments, we have learned a lot of lessons. I think for people may not be, as interested in the inner workings of bureaucrats and kind of the governmental, technocratic type of things that we've set up, but we've instituted those types of structures within the federal government. We have a notification framework that we've put out, and there is a process, for the Director of National Intelligence, if they identify intelligence that may be indicative of a foreign influence operation, to coordinate with career government officials to understand the veracity of that campaign, and then to make a determination of how to notify the affected individual or the public. So that structure exists now in a more intentional fashion. So I think we have our eyes up in a way that we hadn't in the past, in terms of governmental coordination. So, the IC is talking to law enforcement, is talking to DHS. Everyone's kind of on the same page about how those issues come up and how we will get ahead of them. And so I think we should be proud as the U.S. government of the work that we've done to shore that up. When we as DHS think about our role, we think about it in a couple of different ways as a means for addressing these foreign influence type of campaigns. I think for one, we really want to focus on elevating state and local voices. To my earlier point, this is a constant theme of how we want to really uplift our local partners. So when these types of issues are coming, we want to give information to state and locals. We want to make sure that they are the ones that are ultimately going to be the ones refuting this information as it affects them. I'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about what we saw, I think, in New Hampshire with some of the voice cloning activities around campaigns going out in President Biden's voice, digitally altered, falsely created, changing the day of the vote. But that was New Hampshire Attorney General, and the local justice unit in the state handled that, and I think that's a very appropriate and meaningful way to deal with it. We have capable resources on the ground in state and locals, and they are going to be empowered by the federal government. Second, I think we as DHS have, as you're very familiar with, Secretary Johnson designated election infrastructure as a critical infrastructure subsector. And so, again, that's a little bit of bureaucratic conversation, but that really unlocks tools for us in DHS to prioritize resources and really get election infrastructure out there. And so in that vein, we do maintain a website to kind of make sure that we are refuting claims that are inaccurate about the actual election infrastructure and the promulgation of an election, to make clear what is false in that election infrastructure space specifically. And then finally, I think, and again, in coordination with our interagency partners, we really want to highlight the TTPs, the tactic, techniques, and procedures that foreign adversaries are using, because folks need to know what the latest ways that these adversaries are looking to influence us are, so that we as a public can be more informed to readily identify those types of issues. The government is going to out these types of campaigns when we can, but they could be everywhere. They could be on your social media without you even realizing it. But if we can provide more information about how adversaries are doing it, if there are specific things that they're leveraging, we want to put that out there and kind of inform the public in that sense. So that's how DHS is thinking about this issue. And then again, more broadly, we're very much engaged with our intelligence community colleagues on the broader threats.
Yeah, great. I want to hit one of those broader threats, but I realize I don't have a time keeper here, so just give me a high sign when we're about 5 or 10 minutes out, okay? I think some of the threats that are highlighted in the threat assessment to our democratic processes and to trust in government institutions, and to the ability of our election process to serve the function of the peaceful transition or retention of power, will not be necessarily obvious at the outset in terms of the information, impact of information operations. And specifically, I think a lot about information operations undermining public trust in the courts and our justice system. In 2019, CSIS, we put out a report called Beyond the Ballot, and it cataloged all of the ways in which the Kremlin was engaged in information operations that undermine public trust in our justice system and in our courts, in its independence and its impartiality. A message that it was not just flawed and needing reform, which it is, but that it was irrevocably broken and the individual is powerless to bring about change. And that's a very debilitating message. As we see the courts increasingly being brought into directly involved in elections, right? All these election-related cases, and cases involving former President Donald Trump, we know that we are going to be in a situation in which the people who lose, where the cases don't go the way they want in the American public, are likely to say that the courts have acted politically, et cetera. And we know that our adversaries will lean into those vulnerabilities that are probably vulnerabilities of our own making. And that undermining trust in the courts undermines their ability to be a constructive and the essential role that we look to them to play in helping to determine these cases involving elections, and therefore may undermine that peaceful transition or retention of power. Is DHS working with the courts? Because again, all of the things we worry about in election infrastructure, cybersecurity as well as information operations, is this something that's on DHS's radar screen, or do you see this as being the primary responsibility of some other element of government? Are you aware of anybody sort of focusing on this aspect?
So, I think it's a valid question. There is a certain level of, respect for separation of powers here. I think the courts have, their IT and cybersecurity offices that are responsible for protecting those systems and making sure that those types of things are coming out. We want to be respectful of that, but I think if we're able to provide, information or advisories, I think we do that when appropriate. I think to your earlier point, I think to zoom out even, I think that's a very common threat, and we know that foreign adversaries generally exploit the divisions in our culture and in our society to sow doubt and to influence us, whether that's any range of divisive issues in this country. So we have to be very alert to the fact that that is something that's weaponized against us.
Yeah. So you mentioned a couple times AI, and I know the department has come out with, I think the first in the federal government, a really proactive policy statement about the ways in which you are going to look at both the opportunities of AI and the challenges of AI. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that in this precise election context. You mentioned the robocalls in New Hampshire, but how else under that strategy are you both potentially using AI to help with the potential threats in the election and dealing with the challenges?
Sure. And I give a lot of credit to Secretary Mayorkas on his forward-leaning about use of artificial intelligence. I think you may understand the wide breadth of activities the department does. Others may not. Over 200,000 employees, everything that ranges from Secret Service to customs to TSA at airports, the Coast Guard. So in reality, the department and its activities in pursuit of its normal mission touch the lives of many Americans on a daily basis. And so I mention this because I think it gives the department a unique opportunity to leverage artificial intelligence in a really exemplary way of how to engage with society and how to gauge Americans on it. We do both sides of the coin. We are part of the policymaking and national security apparatus when you're talking, big picture White House decision making, national security decision making, but we're also implementing it in a way that others may not be. And so we really see the risks in the national security space, but we also want to leverage them in the mission space to maximize what we're doing. We've launched an array of pilot programs to better utilize resources with AI to better detect and to better train individuals, to better detect goods coming across the border. The Secretary really wants to leverage it, to increase our ability to capture fentanyl kind of coming into the country, a broad array of uses. So I think it's a really interesting use case for us. To pivot, on the election front, I think we see artificial intelligence in the election space as not necessarily introducing a new threat or risk in and of itself. I think it's, again, a means to a more hyper personalized or a faster means with which we can, an adversary could potentially disrupt or interrupt an election. So what does this look like? I think it could be a couple of different ways, and I think you have to rack and stack it on a little bit of parts of the election. So there's cybersecurity risks, which stem from better phishing emails, better language and scripts being written by artificial intelligence from foreign actors who may otherwise have had broken English or other things that come across some of your spam inboxes. I think election workers, campaigns, even election equipment vendors are going to be impacted by this, and that could give access to your systems, which could result in other campaigns to show how false claims of equipment being defective or being manipulated. So I think that is the possibility. At the same time, I think AI can create generated content that is false that can be used to further intimidate people, further intimidate poll workers, maybe harass these same individuals. And then thirdly, I think artificial intelligence and some of the content it could create, more akin to what we saw in New Hampshire, can be attempts to disrupt the process, right? To put out false voice or video notes around when the election's happening or where the election's happening, or scramble people maybe at the last minute. So I think those are all not new, right? But they are hyper. They're on a faster pace. They're going to be more sophisticated, and they're going to be harder to detect. Just a few months ago, CISA, our operational arm, put out an advisory, a couple pages, on threats of AI, outlining these threats to election workers. So we've done a bit of an education campaign because we want election workers to understand that this is a reality. AI is the news of the day in a lot of our circles, certainly in DC and maybe Silicon Valley, but there's the rest of the country in between, and the range of AI familiarity is going to range. And so we've tried to educate the poll workers and the election officials that, one, AI is here, and then give them a little bit of a framework of how we think these threats are going to potentially affect them, and then three, provide some mitigating guidance. And a lot of those, frankly, at the end of the day, end up being a mixture of educational and cybersecurity. So making sure that your cyber and digital doors are locked, that you're not making yourself vulnerable, that your data is not out there to be otherwise exploited or targeted and amplified through artificial intelligence. So we see the threat. We don't think it's necessarily a new one, but it's definitely going to make us need to be a little bit faster. And so we'll take it from there. But I think it's going to definitely be an interesting part of the election landscape coming in November.
Yeah. One of the things that I've long felt about generative AI and the fake videos and fake audio that seems so real is this problem of what some of my colleagues call the liar's dividend. Right? I've always worried that as we get better at detecting and then pointing out that something is fake, that this video, this photo, whatever is fake, that people begin to doubt their ability, that they can't believe their eyes, right?
Yeah.
And it becomes then very difficult to prove something with video that is real or audio that is real. And we've seen how this can play out in the aftermath of an election, where there are maybe claims that things happened with ballot boxes or with ballots or what have you, that things were going on in the rooms where the ballots were being counted, where even if you've got cameras that are watching and you can show video, that now, because we have publicized how things could be fake, that you've got this problem where the real things are no longer believed. I know there are a lot of folks out there working hard to address that particular challenge around provenance, ways to, in effect, watermark video, for example, that would preserve a chain of custody. But can you talk a little bit about how you guys might be working to address that particular challenge?
So that issue of watermarking is something that's specifically cited in President Biden's AI executive order. And so we've been in contact with the technical parts of the government, like NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology at Department of Commerce, who's charged with really leading the technical overlays of what those types of efforts might look like. And so I think that will be important. But I think the more practical reality is that this is a role for the companies to play. And I think you see the companies, the AI companies in particular, thinking about this in a thoughtful manner. You know, there's some wild stat I hear at every conference I go to about the number of elections occurring this year globally, right? It's something like 3/4 of the continent of the world's population will be engaging in an election. So I think the AI companies understand that to a certain extent, and you know, you see it happening in different countries already with tooling around with generative AI. It's, you know, it's not something that is going to be novel in a few months, but I think the AI companies get it. I know that, you know, on the margins of the Munich Security Conference, they talked a little bit about an agreement to try and, you know, take efforts to better understand and take action around these types of issues. And so, you know, the companies that are creating this AI technology, I think, are starting to think about it in a productive way, which I think is helpful. So, you know, obviously we encourage them to continue to do that work.
Great. I want to give you an opportunity. A big part of DHS's mission, obviously we've talked a lot about the critical work with state and local election officials and with your federal partners and with vendors and all of the folks involved in election infrastructure and the importance of those communications. But a big part of it is also communicating with the American public.
Absolutely.
You've talked a bit about that, and the ways that you might be doing that in the context of disinformation, et cetera. But, you know, it's a challenge for DHS, as it is for all institutions today, to communicate with the public that is, many of whom are skeptical about government institutions. How are you thinking about the important role that DHS has in communicating with the public in the context specifically of this environment? What are the kinds of things that you are thinking about to try to overcome that, to make sure that you are indeed putting forward trusted, trustworthy? I know a big part of that is to put the spotlight on those firsthand sources of authoritative sources of information at the state and local level. But more broadly, how are you thinking about that? And then I would just give you an opportunity today to communicate with the American public. What's the most important sort of message and takeaway that you would want them to have from this conversation, and as they think about the 2024 election, safeguards for that election?
Thanks. So communicating with election officials, the public, we understand it's going to be tricky. It's not going to shake our resolve. It's not going to stop us from putting out the information and communicating at a range of levels, whether that is at the very technical levels of cybersecurity experts going out there, physical security experts, or talking to various parts and different branches of the government, or the American public itself. We're not going to shy away from giving the information that we have that's needed. I think transparency is only a benefit in this context, and we're committed to doing that. I think we have power in numbers, and I think we have a lot of federal partners that all have different pieces of the pie. It's a complicated federal set of roles and responsibilities that, you know, I know folks may not always get why one agency can't do it all, but I think being in lockstep with our partners at DOJ and DNI and others based on what the threat is, and having a joint coordinated message is going to be really important. I think we've tightened that up, and we're going to be very much locked at the hip as an interagency to make sure that we're communicating as one voice. But I don't think that changes anything. I think we realize that there's going to be challenges, but we're going to do our jobs, and that's kind of what we're here to do. And we're going to do it faithfully and as down the line as we can. I think in terms of what the American public should take away is that I just think it's vitally important that you go to trusted voices and trusted sources. Identify where and who your local election officials are. Identify where their website is, that they're going to update information. They are going to be the ones that are putting out the authoritative sources of information. And so you really need to know where to get that information from, and that should be your resource. We have obviously a ton of federal resources, but really working with as local a partner as you can who's running your election and identifying those to be educated in the run-up is going to be really important.
Yep. And I would give a shout out to the National Association of Secretaries of State, which is the association of all of the secretaries of state and election officials across the country, red and blue states, nonpartisan. And they have hashtag trusted information 2024, where individuals can go, and it's all 50 states are listed there, the state and local election, at least the state election websites. And so that is a very authoritative place to go to see how you can get information from those who have firsthand information about the time, place, and manner of the elections, for example. So really an important message. We do have a few minutes left if we've got questions. Yes. And Paula, give me the high sign when we're out of time. Thanks.
Hello there. My name is Ujjwala Pluri, and I work at U.S. Customs Office of Trade. And my question is, given the rise of artificial intelligence, there's an Internet of Things. There's a lot more security vulnerabilities in terms of hackers hacking into the wireless networks, for example. What steps do you think we can take, especially during the election season, to, for example, secure the wireless networks that everyone uses? For example, it could get compromised, and deepfakes and other types of misinformation could easily, land in the screens and tablets of Americans.
Thanks for the question. I think you hit on a really good point that the agencies, the local, state and local agencies that are doing these are really susceptible to very common vulnerabilities. These tend to be very small offices, at times, sometimes even using public Wi-Fi at times, I know back in the day. And so I think really understanding the nature of your network, the connectivity, and doing proper cybersecurity analysis is going to be really important. And that's something CISA can help with. There are a number of free cybersecurity services that the department offers where we can scan for vulnerabilities and help give you a report about what those might be. But I think, CISA also publishes something called the Known Exploited Vulnerability List, which is a list, literally, of vulnerabilities and different types of products that we know adversaries are utilizing for ransomware or other cyber intrusions. And so those are some of the most critical vulnerabilities that one should look to patch in terms of prioritization.
Great.
Hi, Rebecca Santana from the Associated Press. Can you talk, you've mentioned social media, and can you talk a little bit about what so much of this disinformation is being spread on social media and numerous different platforms. Are you guys in discussions with them at all about how to stop that? Or are you letting them handle it the way they want to? Are they reaching out to you at all to ask for any type of input or advice? Or are they basically saying, we're going to do whatever we want to do. We don't care about this anymore?
Thanks. I get the question. I think I'm going to respectfully withhold an answer just due to pending, I think, litigation in some of the courts around this very matter. So I don't know that I'm in a position to comment on that. Thank you.
Yeah, that was one of the questions I had as well, is the degree to which these court cases are impacting the important work that the DHS, CISA, and other parts of the government have done as part of our whole of nation response to this threat. So I think, we have a little bit of an answer there in a non-answer. Yeah.
Could I follow up with one other question? You had mentioned security clearances for, I believe, local and state officials.
We need you to be at the microphone.
Sorry.
And then, yeah.
Sorry. You had mentioned getting security clearances in some cases for state and local officials so they can see some of this information. Can you expand on that a little bit more? I mean, is this like a relatively recent thing in the last couple of years, or is this a long time tradition or practice?
It's a standard practice. Suzanne might have known this from back in the day. DHS tends to own the responsibility of providing security clearance to state and locals or whomever we need to share information with. It's something we do across a range of sectors. We do classified briefings to executives of companies and other critical infrastructure owners and operators so that we can share classified information so they have the context as to why we're concerned about a particular threat. And so that's a service DHS has long provided, and so focusing on state and local election officials is one part of that community.
That particular piece is a post-2016 improvement.
Sure.
Giving state and local election officials clearances to be able to share sensitive information with them. That was something they were very concerned about and was a real challenge in 2016.
Yeah.
The governors, if I remember correctly, I think governors have access to classified information by virtue of their office, which is how members of Congress are. Members of Congress have access to classified information. They don't get clearances, mostly because of separation of powers, right? Issues. But the decision was made by virtue of their office. They need access, and so they get access. After 9/11, I was among those who said, we need the same, governors are in the same situation. And they should be given clearances, or access, not clearances necessarily, but access based on their positions. And in 2016, we were sharing information with cleared individuals in the governor's offices and assuming that it would get to the election officials. And in some states it did, and in some states it didn't. So we realized we really needed to make sure that those sometimes more independent offices had their own ability to get access to sensitive information where it was necessary.
And I'll just add, I think these days a lot of governors, for instance, have Homeland Security advisors at the state level that can be individuals that are done. And we also administer those clearances, but we work in concert with agencies like FBI who have field offices, 54 across the country, so that we can get individuals into the secure rooms, because there's a physical location issue here as well. So we work with them to put them in local FBI offices in secure comms, and then we're able to deliver information even right here from DC over to meet them where they are.
Great. Well, Iranga, thank you so much
you.
with all that you have on your plate to take the time to come and help educate us about both the threats, but really importantly, all the great work that's being done to address those threats and to help Americans have confidence in the legitimacy of that process and the outcomes. So thank you very much, and best of luck to you as you continue to work on these issues.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Look forward to the further discussions, and hopefully we'll have a good election season.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Let's give Iranga a round of applause.